This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Welcome to Atomic Biscuits number 2024-1201 Vector. We'll start out at Breitbart.com. They had an article this week, Schiff, Gabbard combines inexperience with bad judgment. Yes, Mr. Standard Hotel himself, little Schiffy Schiff, is criticizing someone else. Why? Because someone is defecting from his team. Senator-elect Adam Schiff, Democrat from California, said Monday on MSLSD's Inside that former Representative Tulsi Gabbard, Democrat from Hawaii, President-elect Donald Trump's pick to lead the intelligence community, combines inexperience with bad judgment. When asked about Gabbard, Schiff said, "I think she combines inexperience with bad judgment, which is not particularly the kind of combination you're looking for in the head of intelligence agencies. Looking at inexperience, she has not even served on the Intelligence Committee in the House. She has no experience in the military with intelligence mattering. She is completely inexperienced in an area where the programs are deeply complicated." He continued, "When you look at her judgment, defending Russia's invasion of Ukraine, echoing Kremlin talking points, taking meetings and going all the way to Syria to take a meeting with Bashar al-Assad, a murderous dictator who gasses his own people, claiming that this is not someone who is an enemy of the United States, at a minimum, shows terrible judgment. And the problem is, our allies are not going to share intelligence with us if they don't trust the person running the intelligence agencies." Schiff added, "We can't just have someone that has poor judgment advising the president. This is the other job of the Director of National Intelligence. They oversee all the intelligence agencies. You have to manage competition between the agencies and priorities for the agencies, but they also advise the president. You want that person giving the president advice to have good judgment. The president-elect already has this very unhealthy, dangerous way. We don't need someone whispering in his ear that Vladimir Putin is his friend or Bashar al-Assad is his friend. That, too, is a real concern." What I see here is somebody who is deeply worried that the shenanigans he's gotten up to are going to get found out. Having control over these people, meeting in skiffs, saying you have information and evidence when you don't. This guy is a complete clown, and he is losing at every turn. It's going to be very interesting to see how Schiff fares in this new environment.
During the process of confirmation, say Dr. Oz is quizzed and Dr. Oz's connection to Oprah is quizzed, and then Oprah starts getting quizzed. All of a sudden, it's not Trump saying, "We've got bad people up here." The people are being informed by a legitimate process of the background of some of these very, very, very bad people. So he's not just picking a cabinet. He is actually using that process for multiple purposes. He's got the legitimate ones, RFK Jr., brilliant. Democrat, make America healthy again. This is that unity that I think we spoke about last time. It's not a unity of the party, but it's a unity of the country. There are good people on both sides of politics. Let's get the best people and throw them up there. So he's done that. Then he throws a couple of problems in, and people are now going, "Whoa, what's happening?" And whenever that happens, I think, okay, they've got a very sexy move coming up now. He's playing poker.
Bonjour tout le monde. I had a good call with Donald Trump last night again. We obviously talked about laying out the facts, talking about how the intense and effective connections between our two countries flow back and forth. We talked about some of the challenges that we can work on together. It was a good call. This is something that we can do, laying out the facts, moving forward in constructive ways. This is a relationship that we know takes a certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do. One of the really important things is that we be all pulling together on this. The Team Canada approach is what works. That's where, putting aside partisanship, that's where I reached out immediately to Doug Ford to agree with him that we would have a First Minister's meeting this week to talk about the United States. Talked with François Legault and some other premiers as well. There's work to do, but we know how to do it.
I mean, you don't have to look very hard to find Schiff's history with partying and dead bodies and parades. I mean, he really is a clown. Breitbart also had this story. Breitbart Business Digest: Trump threatens 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, trying to keep that fentanyl from China out of America. Why is anyone surprised Trump is serious about using tariffs? President-elect Donald Trump said on Truth Social that he would impose sweeping new tariffs on Mexico and Canada through an executive order that he would sign on January 20th, the day he is scheduled to take the oath of office. Trump's post caught many by surprise, which is itself surprising. Trump has been very clear that he plans to use tariffs as a tool to pursue U.S. geopolitical interests. He does not look at tariffs as simply a protectionist policy to defend critical U.S. industries. Instead, he sees tariffs and access to U.S. markets as leverage to win cooperation from our trading partners and economic rivals. Here's the post in full. As everyone is aware, thousands of people are pouring through Mexico and Canada, bringing crime and drugs at levels never seen before. Right now, a caravan coming from Mexico composed of thousands of people seems to be unstoppable in its quest to come through our currently open border. On January 20th, as one of my many first executive orders, I will sign all necessary documents to charge Mexico and Canada a 25% tariff on all products coming into the United States and its ridiculous open borders. This tariff will remain in effect until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. Both Mexico and Canada have the absolute right and power to easily solve this long-simmering problem. We hereby demand that they use this power, and until such time that they do, it's time for them to pay a very big price. The Wall Street Journal described this as the clearest indication since his election victory that he plans to follow through on the tough campaign rhetoric that helped propel him to the White House. It's hard to imagine why anyone needed that to be made clear, but the immediate reaction to Trump's Truth Social post made it clear that sending that signal was actually necessary. The Truth Social announcement not only threatened tariffs, it also laid out the path away from tariffs. If Mexico and Canada cooperate with the U.S. government under Trump's leadership in securing our border from fentanyl and illegal migration, they will maintain their current access to U.S. markets. This is an example of what Treasury Secretary nominee Scott Bessent has described as escalating to de-escalate. It is Trump's opening gambit in three-party negotiations over the shape of trade, border, and drug policies. The fact that the announcement of this policy came so early, 2 months before Trump's inauguration, means that Trump is giving Mexico and Canada plenty of time to submit their counteroffers and reform their own policies to comply with the incoming administration's goals. Trump's ask is hardly onerous. Neither Mexico nor Canada has a strong self-interest in resisting U.S. border control or facilitating the fentanyl trade. Both have an extremely strong self-interest in maintaining their access to U.S. consumers. As Sarah Eisen of CNBC pointed out, 77% of Canada's exports and 83% of Mexico's go to the United States. Mexico's exports to the U.S. add up to nearly 1/4 of its gross domestic product. The initial reaction to Trump's message from Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum is being viewed as a threat of retaliation if the U.S. imposes tariffs. The phenomenon of migration or the consumption of drugs in the United States will not be dealt with by threats or with tariffs, Sheinbaum wrote in a letter to Trump on Tuesday, which she read out at her daily press conference. One tariff will come in response to another, and so on until we put shared companies at risk. This is likely posturing for the domestic Mexican audience rather than a sign that Mexico will not negotiate with the Trump administration, but it may also be a test of Trump's resolve. Trump may have to raise tariffs in order to show Sheinbaum that he really means business. Ultimately, however, we expect that Mexico and Canada will agree to terms that will allow them to avoid anything on the scale of 25% tariffs. The cost of doing otherwise to their economies would be too high. I tend to agree with the sentiment of this article that they will cave, but say they don't up front. I think Trump would just close the border. I mean, it would be like, okay, so until you get your stuff together, we're just going to lock it down. Oh, and we're going to also pump all these illegals right back into you. It's not sustainable for Mexico. They know it. They can pinch off this illegal migration at their southern border, and Canada can get a little stricter about who they allow to wander around up there as well. So I think that everybody sees it coming. He's going to be serious about a border wall, and it's going to get done. And rounding out our trip to Breitbart.com is this article: Trump may kick establishment media out of White House briefing room, make seats for new media. President-elect Donald Trump is considering rearranging White House press briefings in a move that could leave establishment media outlets out to dry. Instead of hostile legacy media outlets, Trump could seat new media hosts such as Megyn Kelly or Joe Rogan. Donald Trump Jr. revealed the plan Monday on his podcast, Triggered with Donald Trump Jr., with Michael Knowles. Knowles inquired if Carolyn Leavitt is looking at the new press briefing room chart, if maybe it's time to reorder that chart and maybe take away some people's seats. Trump Jr. responded, "We're going to break some news here," continuing, "I literally had this conversation I was flying back. I was on the plane with my father. I think it was coming back from the SpaceX launch with Elon Musk last week, and we were talking about the podcast world and some of our friends and Rogan and guys like you." He revealed his father responded, "That's a great idea, Don." So that may be something in the works, Trump Jr. added. The White House briefing room seats only 49 credentialed members of the press, yet while the White House controls who is credentialed, the Independent White House Correspondents Association decides who is seated and where. During his first administration, Trump temporarily banned CNN's Jim Acosta from the briefing room. The White House relented after CNN launched a legal skirmish, and Acosta returned to briefings. Podcasts have quickly gained prominence, including significant gains since Trump left office, but the White House Correspondents Association may be unlikely to welcome new media into their fold. It's unknown if Rogan or Kelly will be interested in being seated for press briefings. Breitbart News editor-in-chief Alex Marlow also appeared on the episode of Triggered, during which Trump Jr. suggested Marlow should take over MSNBC if Musk buys the struggling network. Look, I would be surprised if the briefing room remains intact. Underneath this building, there was a pool once upon a time. They should return the press pool to being just that, a pool house, and then they should consider the new media approach and eliminate legacy media altogether. Let them meet wherever they want to. Nobody's watching them. Nobody's listening to them.
I heard what you're saying about X. I saw a survey this week. It's now the most ideologically balanced user platform.
Scott,
of any platform.
stop. It's too early. I just sat down. I've only been here for 2 minutes.
You're going to be embarrassed when I tweet out after the show, but
you
it's
cannot
true.
say that.
So,
That's not the case.
So
Who's the source of that?
What I find, we reported it on this network.
Look at this. The party ID among those who regularly use X/Twitter for news. Back in 2022, 65% of those who regularly use Twitter/X for news were Democrats. Just 31% were Republicans. Look at where we are today. Just a completely different picture. Now it's basically split between Democrats at 48%, Republicans at 47%. And what I should note, Mr. Berman, is this new overall makeup matches the overall electorate far better.
Dante Moretti had the story, "The Libs Are Not All Right," over at AmericanMind.org. Political fear-mongering has real psychological consequences. In the wake of Donald Trump's crushing victory over Vice President Kamala Harris, social media has been flooded with videos of apartment or vehicle-bound neurotics screaming, banging pots and pans in sheer disbelief, packing their belongings, or generally convulsing as if Kristallnacht was upon us. The American public has been introduced to the 4B movement, in which liberal women appropriate a South Korean sex strike because justice. To be sure, social media is at best a caricature of real life. Only the most dramatic individuals will shave their heads for reproductive rights, read for likes. But most people do not express themselves in quite such a hyperbolic register. That said, in this case, the memes are imitating real life. Not every ex-Kamala voter is experiencing a full-scale breakdown. But judging based on my own clinical observations as a practicing therapist, I believe it may well be true that a significant number of young American leftists are going through a collective mental health crisis. I speak from some experience, having spent multiple hours per day over the past few weeks hearing from clients about the damage inflicted upon their psyches by the Trump win. This is their account of things. My own opinion, however, is that someone has subjected these kids to psychic trauma, but it wasn't Donald Trump. I usually begin each appointment by reminding clients of our previous appointment, whereupon the client usually picks up where he or she left off, telling me about personal struggles, generational dynamics, or relationship problems. But since Trump's victory, a startling number of clients have simply pivoted to another subject entirely. Usually I hear some variation of, I just can't, before I'm told with some incredulity that it needs saying that it is impossible to focus on anything other than the election. When, after listening to a client's political fears, I gently suggest that we should now get back to discussing the husband's death, cocaine use, crushing panic while driving, infidelity, or what have you, I'm waved off as if we needed a full clinical hour to talk about Trump, World War III, reproductive rights, or a future daughter's reproductive rights. Maybe the most jarring comment I heard was from a client who expressed relief that a close relative had already died and thus escaped this shit that's about to go down. One truism I've observed in my practice is you love what you pay attention to. I'm not saying that my clients spend $180 to talk about the election because they don't care about their addiction, spouses, etc., but I'm saying that they are choosing to prioritize and therefore nourish their hatred for Trump. This, of course, increases their distress, which increases their hatred. This is not a vicious cycle they all just stumbled into by unfortunate happenstance. They were taught incessantly by friends, by online forums, by figures they trust in the media, that Trump trumps all. Practitioners of what's called positive psychology will often talk in terms of clients' tendency to fixate on either an external or an internal locus of control. Different individuals will either instinctually take responsibility for problems that arise or defer responsibility to another person, system, or institution. A teenage boy who gets caught with weed, if his natural locus of control is internal, will admit fault and responsibility even if everyone else on the soccer team tried it at the party. A boy whose natural inclination is external will cite peer pressure or insist that his friend's parents said it was fine. Although one type of locus isn't necessarily better than the other, the external locus of control does tend to foster victimhood. Often it needs to be counterbalanced by inward focus in order to facilitate agency and improvement. Taking radical responsibility for one's issues is a key engine of change. I've been working with some of my clients for quite some time now, and many have gradually learned to shift their locus of control inward. This has aided them in their mental health pursuits. But one common trait I have noticed amongst my Trump-focused clients is that when the orange man comes up, they dart instantly back to an external locus of control. After the election, many of them have taken notable steps backward in our work together. One client even reverted to a cocaine habit after 3 months of sobriety because what's the point now? Another client who struggles with depression reported to just be in bed to rot for 2 days straight. Others have threatened to cut off their parents because they don't know how they can possibly have another conversation with family members who voted for Trump. These clients are spiraling back out to an external locus of control. The tragic element in all these cases is that these fragile individuals have been violently interrupted in their healing progress by a completely imaginary evil projected in Hitler mustachioed IMAX across the pages of The New Republic, blared from the anchor's desk on CNN, and generally beaten into the heads of everyone in their immediate circle of trust. And though I personally make a principle of never sharing my political beliefs, some therapists actually encourage their clients' persecution complexes by adopting an overtly ideological approach attributing trauma to systems of racism, sexism, or homophobia. The effects of this are as you would expect. It's the opposite of helpful. The Stanford and Harvard-trained psychiatrist Dr. Paul Conti has qualified what exactly good mental health means. According to Dr. Conti, someone who exemplifies good mental health, and therefore someone who can be considered well-adjusted, cultivates an attitude of gratitude and a feeling of personal autonomy. Keeping this definition in mind, one does not need to be a trained psychotherapist to understand how mental health has deteriorated so grievously in the past 20 or so years, especially among those who lean left. When parents, teachers, university professors, and statesmen espouse a rhetoric of ingratitude and dependence, it is no wonder why much of the public suffer from anxiety, depression, and compulsion. Of course, we will laugh at the libs of TikTok shaving their heads and screaming in their cars, but we have to realize that this is not the worst of it. If anything, those who engage in such spectacles may have more promise, given that they are more than likely to be opportunistic actors who would abandon their political ideas as lightly as they take them up. But we should not laugh at those who break their sobriety or plunge into isolation because of Trump victory. They are truly sick, and ideological bad actors have preyed off their desperation for personal clout, terrorizing them with confected fears, and then discarding them to suffer the psychological consequences. There's a mental health crisis in this country. On this, we can all agree. But the peddlers of Trump derangement syndrome don't seem to care that their cynical, apocalyptic politics bear no small part of the blame. Again, that's over at AmericanMind.org.
But I wonder now, as your father is assembling his team, as maybe Caroline Levitt is looking at the new press briefing room chart, maybe it's time to reorder that chart and maybe take away some people's seats.
So we're going to break some news here because I literally had this conversation. I was flying back. I was on the plane, I guess, with my father. I think it was coming back from the SpaceX launch with Elon last week. And I was sitting there and we were talking about like the podcast world and some of our friends and Rogan and guys like you and, me to a lesser extent, I wouldn't be able to get a seat. That would be nepotism or whatever the hell, I'd be indicted again. I'd have to do more congressional testimony. So I'll pass. But we actually had this conversation about like, given how the media has behaved. I mean, you brought up the New York Times. You saw the fact check of Bobby Kennedy talking about the different ingredients in Fruit Loops. And it was like, no, it's exactly the same as Canada, except we use yellow dye number 5 here instead of like orange, like carrots. And we use purple dye number 2,376 instead of blueberry extract. And I'm like, that's your fact check? Like, it's the same, but for these like really toxic chemicals that are banned in, dozens of countries. Like, I don't get it. But we had the conversation about opening up the press room to a lot of these independent journalists. Like, why should, if the New York Times has lied, they've been adverse to everything, they're functioning as the marketing arm of the Democrat Party, like, why not open it up to people who have larger viewerships, stronger followings, Like, it's not like the New York, I mean, how much money are they losing a year? The Washington Post, lost 70 to 45 to $70 million. Doesn't seem like they're a great success. So just because they've been there longer, it's like the way Congress functions. Like, you get a committee, not because you know anything about banking, but because you've been there longer. And it's like,
right.
Doesn't seem like a great way to do things. So we've had that conversation. Like, that's a great idea, Don. I was like, I think we should do this. And so that may be in the works. Let's see. That's going to blow up some heads. So, we'll see.
I'll leave the links to all of the stories I cover on today's show over on my account at the free speech platform Gab at BACFA. Wasteful subsidies. Ramaswamy slams Biden administration for rushing $50 billion chip subsidies ahead of Trump takeover. This is the story at dailycaller.com by Marianne Angela. Vivek Ramaswamy took to social media Tuesday to criticize the Biden administration for its rapid allocation of $50 billion in chip-making subsidies. In a post on X, previously known as Twitter, Ramaswamy shared a Politico interview where Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo detailed her plans to speed up the CHIPS and Science Act. Ramaswamy also said that members of the Biden administration aim to finalize the funds before President-elect Donald Trump assumes office in January. During the interview with Politico, Raimondo said she intends to obligate nearly all the designated funds before January 20th. I'd like to have really almost all the money obligated by the time we leave, Raimondo told Politico. Post-election, the Biden team secured more than $16 billion in final awards for 5 companies, including TSMC, Global Foundries, Rocket Lab, BAE Systems, and Intel. Prior to these awards, only a single contract of $123 million had been granted to Polar Semiconductor in Minnesota, Politico reported. Ramaswamy revealed Monday that he, along with Elon Musk's newly formed Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, plans to scrutinize each contract issued in the 11th hour under the CHIPS Act, as well as other fiscal endeavors from the Biden era, such as the Inflation Reduction Act. He intends to propose that inspectors general examine these expenditures closely. Wasteful subsidies under the IRA and CHIPS Act are being rapidly pushed out before the January 20th deadline. DOGE will review every one of these 11th hour gambits and recommend that inspectors general scrutinize these last-minute contracts, Ramaswamy said. Trump appointed Ramaswamy and Musk to lead the DOGE and reduce unnecessary regulations and spending. Ramaswamy previously outlined the DOGE plan mandating that federal employees return to full-time office work. Again, that story's over at dailycaller.com. Over at TheVerge.com, they had this story. Artists say they leaked OpenAI's Sora video model in protest. Artists are not your unpaid R&D, their open letter reads. This is by Kylie Robinson. OpenAI first teased its text-to-video AI model, Sora, back in February and hasn't provided any meaningful updates on when it will be released since then. Now it looks like some artists leaked access to the model in protest of being used by the company for what they claim is unpaid R&D and PR. On Tuesday, a group of Sora beta testers claimed to have leaked early access to Sora with a working interface for generating videos. In a post on Hugging Face, a public repository of AI models, they say that people were able to create lots of AI videos, all of which resemble OpenAI's own Sora demos, before the company intervened to shut down access. TechCrunch first reported on the alleged leak. From the group's open letter. Dear corporate AI overlords, we received access to Sora with the promise to be early testers, red teamers, and creative partners. However, we believe instead we are being lured into art washing to tell the world that Sora is a useful tool for artists. Artists are not your unpaid R&D. We are not your free bug testers, PR puppets, training data, validation tokens. We are not against the use of AI technology as a tool for the arts. If we were, we probably wouldn't have been invited to this program. What we don't agree with is how the artist program has been rolled out and how the tool is shaping up ahead of a possible public release. We are sharing this to the world in hopes that OpenAI becomes more open, more artist-friendly, and supports the arts beyond PR stunts. The authors say that OpenAI's early access program to Sora exploits artists for free labor and art washing or lending artistic credibility to a corporate product. They criticized the company, which recently raised billions of dollars at a $150 billion valuation for having hundreds of artists provide unpaid testing and feedback. They also object to OpenAI's content approval requirements for Sora, which apparently state that every output needs to be approved by the OpenAI team before sharing. When contacted by The Verge, OpenAI would not confirm on the record if the alleged Sora leak was authentic or not. Instead, the company stressed that participation in its research preview is voluntary with no obligation to provide feedback or use the tool. Sora is still in research preview, and we're working to balance creativity with robust safety features for broader use, OpenAI spokesperson Nico Felix said in a statement. Hundreds of artists in our alpha have shaped Sora's development, helping prioritize new features and safeguards. Participation is voluntary with no obligation to provide feedback or use the tool. We've been excited to offer these artists free access and will continue supporting them through grants, events, and other programs. We believe AI can be a powerful, creative tool and are committed to making Sora both useful and safe. Former OpenAI CTO Mira Murati told the Wall Street Journal in March that Sora would be available by the end of the year, but that we will not release anything we don't feel confident on when it comes to how it might affect global elections or other issues. And in a recent Reddit AMA, CPO Kevin Wheel said Sora hadn't been released yet because OpenAI still needed to scale the compute required to power it and get safety/impersonation and other things right. Again, that's over at TheVerge.com. It's been said that the CIA operates like its own little country and that there are sub-states of that country, and North Korea has been listed as one of those that has been captured. So it's interesting to get a story like this from Reuters, which reads, North Korea hackers behind 2019 $42 million Ethereum heist, South Korea police say. I've always wondered just, how the world's happiest people, the North Koreans, who are starving to death, have such great technology. So draw your own conclusions. From Reuters, Seoul, November 21st, South Korean police said on Thursday an investigation confirmed that hackers linked to North Korea's military intelligence agency were responsible for an Ethereum cryptocurrency heist in 2019 worth $58 billion. 58 billion won, which is $41.5 million at the time. More than half of the stolen assets were laundered through 3 crypto exchanges set up by the hackers themselves at a discount to Bitcoin, and the rest were laundered through 51 different exchanges, the National Police Agency said. The hackers infiltrated a crypto exchange where the Ethereum was being kept and stole 342,000 tokens, now valued at more than 1.4 trillion won, which is about $1 billion, the police said in a statement. It did not name the exchange, but South Korea-based Upbit Exchange said at the time it had detected a transfer of 58 billion won of Ethereum to an unidentified wallet. The National Police Agency official declined to confirm the identity of the hackers, but South Korean media said police had identified them as the Lazarus and Andariel groups linked to the North's Reconnaissance General Bureau, affiliated with its military. The police said its findings were based on analysis of Internet protocol addresses used and the subsequent flow of assets. The probe was conducted in cooperation with the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI. And it was the first time North Korea had been identified as the source of a cyber attack on a crypto exchange in South Korea, police said. In May, a panel of United Nations sanctions monitors said it suspected North Korea mounted 97 cyber attacks on cryptocurrency companies between 2017 and 2024, valued at about $3.6 billion. Investigators traced 4.8 Bitcoin to a Swiss crypto exchange and recovered them in October and returned them to the Seoul-based exchange, today valued at about 600 million won, police said. North Korea routinely denies involvement in cyber hacking or crypto heists. I don't think anybody really believes they're capable in this way directly, at least not without help. Or perhaps they are simply the glove and someone else is the hand. And this little pantomime is a way to launder money in and of itself. It also is a way to either legitimize or delegitimize crypto exchanges. Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. I keep my eyes open for things like this. There's so much more out there, but this story came from Reuters.com. Over on Substack.com, I spotted this week, Late Republic Nonsense. It's Dave Reaboy. A whimper, not a bang. Where was Antifa after Trump's victory? The Democrats had gone to the edge of American discourse beyond which is the disintegration of normal political life, and then when they'd been repudiated by the voters, meekly pulled back. Why? Perhaps the only disappointment for those of us elated with the outcome of this month's presidential election was the muted, downcast response from the left at Donald Trump's massive victory. We'd expected angry riots from purple-haired Antifa goons, emotive demonstrations of impotent and self-righteous defiance by Handmaid's Tale cosplayers, and maybe best of all, delicious cable news highlight reels reminiscent of Hillary Clinton's surprise defeat in 2016. The quiet sobbing we got instead came as somewhat of a surprise. For the left, it all seemed to end, as it did at Kamala Harris's victory party at Howard University, with a whimper. There was no defiant or fiery speech that night. In fact, the candidate wasn't seen at all, unwilling to face even the dedicated supporters who had worked hardest for her candidacy. Over the next few days, while there was some hissing and a few entertaining misfiring synapses at MSLSD and CNN, including some angry denunciations of elements of the Democrat Party, the emotion seemed forced and perfunctory. For many, though, the downbeat response to Trump's victory seemed out of place, given the feverish severity of how Democrats had articulated the stakes of this election. In her final month, Harris's campaign dispensed with messaging on any issues, leaning hard into explicit comparisons of Trump with Adolf Hitler and of MAGA politics with fascism and Nazism, evoking the specter of American death camps in the event of the ex-president's victory. Using a strategically timed news hook from former Trump Chief of Staff John Kelly, Harris stared gravely into the camera outside her residence at the U.S. Naval Observatory, warning that her opponent was no longer simply a threat to democracy, but as a Hitlerian Nazi fascist was openly dedicated to its destruction. The setting, too, was significant. Rather than simply reaching down into the rhetorical gutter at a campaign stop, she was using the trappings of her role as vice president to make an official pronouncement on a rival domestic political leader, using language usually reserved for foreign enemies with whom we are at war. The bloody result of a Trump victory, Harris and her media surrogates assured us, was certain. While some in the press had never been shy of slandering Donald Trump as a fascist, the message coming from the candidate herself marked a serious escalation. After all, when faced with an enemy that would extinguish all freedom in America and usher in Holocaust, procedural resistance in courtrooms or acts of civil disobedience are plainly inadequate. With the evil of a Hitler, there is no negotiation, comity, civility, or ordinary politics. Only violent resistance is commensurate with the threat. Some on the left received the message clearly, as intended. Even before Harris herself began referring to him as a fascist, Trump had already been the attempted victim of 2 failed assassinations. Immediately following the first shooter's very near miss, the New Republic all but endorsed this violent final solution to the Trumpian problem, revealing a menacing monochrome drawing of the former president on its cover, complete with Hitler mustache. And below the image, subtle in the color of dried blood, was the headline, "American Fascism, What It Would Look Like," in faux Germanic typeface. Scandalously, law enforcement disappeared any information about the would-be assassin's motives, saving the Democrats having to address the fact that their manifestos dovetailed too closely with party messaging. All this gathered momentum and intensity in the press until, on the evening of November 5th, our sacred democracy simply ended. Donald Trump won the Electoral College and the popular vote by wide margins, and his party was in control of every branch of the federal government. The people had spoken with a clear and resounding voice. If you'd been following the speeches of Vice President Harris, you'd assume that what they wanted was Nazi Germany. When the defeated Democrat finally emerged in public early the next evening, however, her tone had shifted. "Earlier today," she told the crowd, "I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition." Would she congratulate Hitler for his victory? Would she help Hitler's team during their transition? The Democrats had gone to the very edge of American disclosure, beyond which is the disintegration of normal political life, and then, when they'd been repudiated by the voters, meekly pulled back. By stubbornly denying us our riots and hoped-for Schadenfreude, the left had us confused. We, on the right, weren't the ones expecting immediate rage from Antifa and aligned groups at the event of a Republican victory. After all, half of downtown Washington, D.C. was boarded up in anticipation of election night. Why did nothing happen? The surface explanation, of course, is that the Democrats didn't really believe any of it. All that rhetorical venom was merely cynical election year politics at the final crunch of a close election. That theory certainly has some merit based on the warm, smiling welcome with which Joe Biden received the victorious former president at the White House. And while corrosive to social cohesion, the gambit made strategic sense. As Trump was gaining momentum in the final weeks, Democrats began to grow despondent. Harris's campaign needed to raise the temperature to make sure her most committed voters got to the polls. Even if the leadership of the Democrat Party and its surrogates in the media were simply generating outrage, millions of Americans and their audiences now believe with conviction that the long night of fascism has finally descended on America. The rhetoric naturally calls to mind Antifa, the bands of militant anti-fascists who inflicted so much disorder on the country during the first Trump administration. For many on the right, the trauma of the Black Lives Matter riots on the heels of COVID in 2020, followed by Trump being turned out of the White House the next January, has made us understandably jumpy about black blocs and cities ablaze in destructive ideological rage. Harris's scurrilous rhetoric about Trump's alleged fondness for Hitler, however, wasn't aimed at bringing Antifa's violent shock troops into the streets, but at radicalizing the far larger cohort of mainstream Democrats. After all, Antifa believes both Biden and Harris qualify as fascists, and for good measure, war criminals. But Antifa has always been more strategic than it is reactive, and it's far more concerned with revolutionary politics than with electoral variety. For many of the senior Antifa thinkers and organizers, the model of 1968 continues to resonate, even as the protests against the Vietnam War had been gaining strength for a half a decade. It wasn't until the election of Richard Nixon that the left's mass movement exploded. Presented with the foil of a law and order Republican hate object, the intensity of the anti-war protest movement ballooned, leading to the radicalization of militant groups like the Weather Underground into outright terrorism. This was only achievable with the assistance of the media, unencumbered by the balancing act of having to defend a Democrat president. Print and television journalists created a roar of grassroots anger that provided far-left radicals with new recruits, funding, and energy. The parallels to Trump's return to the White House are significant, and the opportunity for a replay of this dynamic has certainly not escaped Antifa's strategic thinkers. It's a common misconception that left-wing violent protest is a spasm of powerlessness. While a David and Goliath narrative is useful in many overseas conflicts in the United States, violent protest is most useful when it can be used as an expression of majority frustration against an easily identifiable and beatable tyrannical minority. Regardless of income bracket, Americans like to think of themselves as middle class, have a bourgeois investment in the continuance of society, and resent violent revolutionaries and anarchists. Unlike in Europe, significant left-wing violent riots in America don't appear spontaneously in response to lost elections. They exist in the context of more sweeping political mobilizations that can plausibly be described by Allied media largely peaceful. As with Nixon and the anti-war movement, media is essential in this element to creating conditions for justifying the cause of unrest and ignoring or contextualizing violent excesses. In this way, Antifa is useful as a fearsome tip of the spear, then melting away into a grander social justice narrative that is, on its surface, familiar and sympathetic rather than threatening. As such, all successful modern left-wing movements in this country are framed in the language of civil rights. The successes of the left's modern race-oriented protest movements, Trayvon Martin in 2012, Michael Brown 2014, George Floyd in 2020, illustrate that the left learned valuable lessons about the kind of topical triggers that work and those that fail. Becoming mass mobilization in response to Trump's promises on immigration and deportation will be an obvious inciting event, and law enforcement needs to be prepared, especially in blue states. In short, we didn't see post-election violence or mass protests because the scale of Trump's victory meant that such rioting would appear, at least temporarily, as the angry self-indulgence of a minority that had been legitimately beaten at the ballot box. But the riots will come soon enough, and Antifa will menace the streets once again. While it wouldn't have served to activate them during or after the 2024 campaign, the Democrats' rhetoric about fascism and Nazism is a boon to Antifa, which looks forward to being presented again, as it was memorably in 2020, storming the beach at Normandy as freedom fighters in the media's next just cause. This is originally published over at tomklingenstein.com. It's over at Late Republic Nonsense. I'll leave the link to this on Gab. What delusions can tell us about the cognitive nature of belief? Delusions can sometimes turn into strongly held beliefs. This is the article over at arstechnica.com by Michael Connors and Peter Halligan from The Conversation, dated November 24th. Beliefs are convictions of reality that we accept as true. They provide us with the basic mental scaffolding to understand and engage meaningfully in our world. Beliefs remain fundamental to our behavior and identity, but are not well understood. Delusions, on the other hand, are fixed, usually false beliefs that are strongly held but not widely shared. In previous work, we proposed that studying delusions provides unique insights into the cognitive nature of belief and its dysfunction. Based on evidence from delusions and other psychological disciplines, we offered a tentative 5-stage cognitive model of belief formation. When faced with an unexpected sensory input or social communication, we seek to account for this based on existing beliefs, memories, and other social information. We then evaluate our account in terms of how well this explains our experiences and how consistent it is with our prior beliefs. If it passes these criteria, the belief is accepted. It then guides what we pay attention to and what other ideas we may consider. We propose that delusions can arise at different stages in this model. Our approach highlights the importance of the individual search for meaning and social context in shaping delusions. It also draws attention to the impact of a delusion once formed on subsequent perceptions and thinking. This model linking delusions and beliefs differs from earlier accounts that suggested delusions were distinct from belief or arise as part of largely passive response to anomalous sensory input such as a hallucination. Previous research, for example, has found that some people who believe that family members were replaced by imposters, known as Capgras delusion, had deficits in processing familiar faces, which could have generated this idea. Based on this, some have suggested that other delusions arise in a similar way but in combination with an as yet undiscovered deficit in the cognitive process of evaluating our beliefs. But these accounts didn't fully consider other contributing factors such as an individual's prior beliefs, social context, and their personal attempts to explain their experiences. The study of delusions has been informed by select informative case studies. Unlike large group studies, case studies allow researchers a more detailed exploration of the origins and course of clinical features not explained by current theories. We recently published a paper in the international journal Cortex that describes a unique case study of a woman who temporarily experienced compelling delusions during a brief hospital admission for postpartum psychosis, which can give rise to hallucinations, delusions, mood swings, and confusion. This is a rare complication of pregnancy affecting around 1 to 2 in 1,000 women, thought to be due to hormonal changes or immunological factors. Natalie, a pseudonym, had no previous medical or psychiatric history. She developed postpartum psychosis while in hospital after the birth of her second child. As part of her condition, Natalie reported several delusions, including the belief that strangers were her parents-in-law in disguise, known as Frigoli delusion. Natalie recovered quickly with treatment. A combination of interviews and observations while she was experiencing the delusions and her later retrospective account offered a unique window into the onset and experience of her delusions. Following a full recovery, Natalie confirmed that she considered her delusions to be strongly held beliefs. She likened them to her conviction that her husband was her husband. This is contrary to some views that suggested that delusions are different from normal beliefs. Natalie was able to identify specific features that contributed to her delusions. In the case of believing that strangers were her in-laws, Natalie identified mannerisms, behaviors, and speech patterns of the strangers that reminded her of her in-laws. This suggested that the delusion could have arisen from inappropriate activation of memory representations of familiar people based on these cues and other factors. Natalie also recalled other beliefs, including that she was dead, known as Cotard delusion. She did not share with clinicians this at the time. She noted that she entertained this idea due to the failure of other explanations to account for her strange experiences and an idea from a television show. Natalie said she eventually dismissed this idea as implausible while still holding other delusional ideas. This suggests that belief evaluation may involve different thresholds for different delusions. It also highlights the private nature of some delusions. Across all her delusions, Natalie described her active involvement in trying to explain and manage her experiences. She reported considering different explanations and testing these by seeking further information. For example, she asked questions of the people she thought were her in-laws. This suggests a surprisingly similar approach to how we typically form beliefs. Natalie recalled the influence of television and movies on her ideas. She also recalled how she elaborated on her delusions once formed based on information in her surroundings. These features challenge theories that delusions simply arise from anomalous sensory data. They instead highlight the role of the individual's search for meaning and social context, as well as the subsequent impact of delusions on perception and thinking. The article goes on to talk a little bit more about this, but I think it's interesting how much television and movies influenced her ability to try to make sense of what didn't make sense around her. We come across things all the time that require us to take our experience and map them to something new and different. Some people wind up at faith. Some people decide that something more is going on, something unseen, something dark. Sometimes we detect something that we can't explain. Who has seen the wind? Someone asked me, what is the definition of faith last Sunday? And I said, it's the belief in things that are unseen. But that doesn't mean that those things are imaginary. We see the leaves blowing in the wind. We can't see the wind, but we can see its effects. Not all of these things are delusional, but science will continue to seek explanations for things that have empirical evidence. It was once science fact, now remember, trust the science, that spontaneous generation occurred, that bugs would just form out of bread if kept in a jar, that mold would grow from that same jar of moldy bread. And yet there was a misapprehension about how bugs laid eggs and how they evolved. This is just like 100 years ago. Science was telling us that flies would just spring from nothing. Should we have trusted the science then, or should we trust the empirical evidence of going deeper than microscopic, deeper into evaluation? Asking, is the settled science really the truth, or is it simply how we interpret our observations with the known ability to dig a little deeper? And shouldn't we challenge constantly? Isn't that the scientific method? To ask, what are our preconceived ideas? Are they based in fact, or is there more? There will be people who so like for instance with kids, we teach them math. At first they don't understand negative numbers. We don't talk about negative numbers. We talk about take away. And then eventually we get to imaginary numbers. And eventually we get to quadrants that don't exist in space and time. We keep going until we have such an esoteric understanding of what could be, but is improbable because our universe isn't constructed that way. But yet there is a calculation that can give us a result that is impossible. So why do we continue to consider the impossible? Because that's how breakthroughs happen. Edge cases bring us innovation. Challenge the science. Challenge your beliefs. And then decide for yourself what is truth. Because you may know before someone else what is right for you and your life. Welcome to the holiday season. It's December. Happy holidays, everyone. I'll see you on the next episode of Atomic Biscuits. So long, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as BitChute, Rumble, DLive and Odyssey. Check out LastScoutRadio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.